I will turn the program over to Virginia Barrett, our Vice President, who will introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Judy. Hello and welcome everyone to our first lecture of the new year, and a warm welcome to our guest speaker today, Verena Huber. Today, our theme is Eros, the creator God and father mother of consciousness as the primary essence of divinity and cognition. Verena will address the high culture and religion of Sumer, a Middle Eastern civilization of the 3rd century BCE, and also the source of the famous Gilgamesh and Inanna myths. She will discuss Jung's concept of Eros and the principle of relatedness. Verena will examine the complementary coexistence of feminine and masculine principles in ancient Sumer, which involve interaction of mind, body, and spirit. Verena will explain how these two principles are involved in the awakening of consciousness today, as well as in the past. Verena Huber was educated in Zurich at the Research and Training Center for Depth Psychology, according to C.G. Jung and Marie-Louise von Franz. She has training in energetic body therapy and breathing techniques. Verena is an analyst in private practice in Zurich, near Zurich. So on the topic of Eros in the ancient civilization of Sumer, please welcome Verena Huber.
Uh-oh.
Okay. A warm welcome to you all. Do you see the screen?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, first of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to bring the Sumerian culture and its people closer to you. In pondering about Eros in ancient civilization of Sumer, I would be happy if we could just gain insights and inspiration on the complementary coexistence of feminine and masculine principles in the archaic world of the Sumerians. I wish this because maybe it would be a small step toward reviving the feminine principle or the concept of Eros as C.G. Jung understands it. I am convinced that our modern society can learn a lot from the Sumerians about this very important topic, especially from a standpoint of Jungian death psychology. Let me now give you a brief overview of topics that will be discussed today. We will do reflections about archaic thinking and archaic man. Archaic means, according to the dictionary, belonging to or originating from a prehistoric or earliest times. But we will go deeper into it with regard to the psychology of C.G. Jung. We will have a look at the geographical location of Sumer and the ancient city of Uruk, the first metropole and for a long time a religious center in Sumer and hometown of King Gilgamesh and goddess Inanna. Uruk is the place of origin of the myth we will take about. Then we will discuss the conquest of Sumer by King Sargon I and its influence of Sumerian life and religion. The famous Ada seal will be looked at, a wonderful scene which shows us how the awakening of consciousness was seen as a religious act in which goddess and god, so to speak, the masculine and feminine principles were equally involved. We will continue with reflections on Sumerian mythology, which agrees in many ways with biblical legends. We will speak about the origin of the flood story with a look at the famous flood tablet. And we will contemplate about the symbolism of the ark and meet the Sumerian Noah named Utanapishti. We will make some psychological reflections on Gilgamesh's longing for eternal life. The myth Inanna and the god of wisdom Enki tells us how the divine me, the Sumerian people by the goddess Inanna, the divine me, which were brought to the people of Uruk. The Sumerian creation myth, the Holupa tree, leads us finally to the possibility of reciprocal recognition and acceptance of the masculine and feminine principle. Since we are talking about C.G. Jung's concept of Eros as it presented itself in the archaic world, let us reflect on archaic thinking. Let us realize how much our life is based on the intellect and on rational thinking, although in every human being, an archaic man is still living. As C.G. Jung quotes, every civilized human being, whatever his conscious development, is still an archaic man at the deeper level of his psyche. It is difficult to get a realistic image of an archaic person. The archaic man lives as intensely in reality as with the unconscious. He projects unconscious contents into reality. These contents are then real for him, such as spirits or ghosts, trees that live, natural events, gods or dreams, and so on. The people of Sumer stood with one foot in reality and with the other in the inner, invisible world, the world that their myths describe. The world of the gods is real for them because this world causes them. We today stand with both feet in reality, and this is also rewarded and recognized. Jung writes in his article Archaic Man, CV10, that we are far removed from the archaic man's world. Our intellect is much more differentiated and rational and focused on the world around us and not on the inner psychic world. In archaic life, the inner psychic unconscious life becomes visible or tangible through the projection into the object. Let me give an example from the Sumerians to show how such projections were considered quite natural and real for them. Let's look at two hymns dedicated to goddess Inanna. They illustrate how the divine, or in this specific case, Eros, was projected into natural phenomena. The Sumerians associated their beloved goddess Inanna with the star of Venus. So to speak, goddess Inanna was projected onto Venus, the morning and evening star. As we will see later, the goddess had great influence not only in the religious life of the people, but also on the reign of the king. So each rising of the star of Venus was dedicated to the worship of the goddess, psychologically the feminine principle. Let's read a few lines of a hymn to illustrate that. The prayer is named the Lady of the Evening. At the end of the day, the radiant star, the great light that fills the sky, the Lady of the Evening appears in the heavens, the people in all the lands lift their eyes to her. My lady looks in sweet wonder from heaven. The people of Sumer parade before the holy Inanna. Inanna, the lady of the evening, is radiant. I sing your praises, holy Inanna. The lady of the evening is radiant on the horizon. This text makes me think of children's evening or sleep prayers addressed to the guardian angel. Most children are still open to miracles and healing powers, open, so to speak, to their archaic world that emerges from the deeper levels of their souls. How healing it would to understand that we could learn from their connection to something greater and stronger than man ever can be. Inanna was seen in destructive natural phenomena, and the anger or suffering goddess had to be soothed. I will not read this prayer again, but you can read it for your own. These prayers show how an authentic religious experience was part of the everyday life and reality of these people. In our modern world, there is an emptiness that all of the social and economic security in the world cannot cure. The missing of a mysterious presence of the sacred makes us lonely and desolate. For C.G. Jung, an authentic religious experience was the key for a healing process of a suffering soul. He quotes in the article Modern Man in Search of a Soul, "There has not been one whose problem in the last resort was not that of finding a religious outlook on life." What Jung meant by this was that for many individuals, the loss of a living religious or spiritual belief system and practice has led to a widespread loss of soul. It is clear for all of us that nowadays we cannot engage in archaic thinking like ancient people did. In following lines, you will hear some quotes from C.G. Jung's article Archaic Man in CV10. I will not mention all of it, but recommend to read about Archaic Man. Jung's experiences with natives illustrate how powerful the archetypal world shows up when unconsciously manifests itself in human beings, for example, in neuroses or complexes. A lot of people cannot recognize these forces because for the civilized man, causality is one of the most sacred dogmas. We distinctly resent the idea of invisible forces. We escape from the frightening world of dreams and superstitions. So we constructed for ourselves a picture of the cosmos worthy to our rational consciousness, that latest and greatest achievement of man. But we reach our limits. We are blocked by the delusion that we have everything under control. The biggest proof could be seen in the COVID pandemic. Worldwide, we are in shock and do not know how to deal with this situation. Now is the time of rethinking, as the purely rational and powerful thinking does not get us anywhere. Since the written Sumerian mythology is up to 5,000 years old, this literature can give us insight into archaic traits living within us. Hopefully, we can gain insights that create new ideas, which will not only be attributed to causality. It's up to us to take these messages seriously or not. Let's now embark to our journey to Sumer, the land of the really gifted and practical people, who, as far as we know today, were not only the first who invented and developed a usable and effective system of writing, but also developed it into a vital and effective instrument of communication that reached a large part of their population. These first writings of the Sumerians, as Samuel Noah Kramer writes in his book, History Begins at Sumer, can satisfy man's universal quest for origins or firsts in the history of civilization. And the most important for our work, we can get answers about how were man's first recorded ethical ideals and religious ideas, so that we even can penetrate to a certain extent into their hearts and souls. This is a quote from Samuel Noah Kramer, one of the first Sumerologists. This seems to me to be invaluable to our work as Jungian analysts or as followers of C.G. Jung's psychology. Let's get back to the Sumerians, hoping to gain insights and understanding ideas from these people. I would like to use the example of Sumer to think about how the masculine principle of today, to which causality, intellectual and differentiating thinking belongs, could be enriched by a deep feminine spirit. In Sumer, the coexistence of Logos, represented by the king, and Eros, represented by the spiritual influence of the goddess, can give us an understanding how we could go forward in integrating feminine spirit, relatedness, into the life of modern men. This is certainly worthwhile, as Sumerian history shows us how creative these people were. We find a lot of firsts in recorded history, as Samuel Noah Kramer describes in his book, History at Sumer, as mentioned before, such as the recording of the first recordings of school, first law codes, and a story about the biblical Moses and Noah, first cosmogony and cosmology, first experiments of shade tree gardening, first moral ideals, and more. I think we too urgently would need first, so to speak, creative ideas to get out of the stagnation in which it seems so we are stuck. So let us now visit these talented people and try to find out about the Sumerians and their long forgotten land that lies in the southern tip of the fertile crescent, today southern Iraq. I show here the picture of Samuel Noah Kramer. I like him very much because his heartful descriptions of these people are really good to read. So on this map, we see the ancient lands Assyria, Akkad, and Sumer, which with their various city-states. They all are located on the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, which were lifelines for the whole fertile crescent and, among other things, helped to build an advanced civilization. It is believed that Sumerians settled on the banks of the river Euphrates in about 5th millennium BC. Sumer did not form a political entity or central state, but was a region of city-states that each of them had their own kings and city gods. Nevertheless, the Sumerians formed a unity since they were in culture, language, and religion unique and differed from all other neighboring peoples, most of whom were of Semitic origin. Our concentration will be on the city of Uruk. We will see here an information board on the edge of the ruins of Uruk. Today, this is the city Varka. It was probably towards the end of the 4th millennium BC, about 5,000 years ago, that Sumerians, as a result of their economic and administrative needs, came upon the idea of writing on clay. Here you see the remains of the temple district and the ziggurat of goddess Inanna. It is believed that about 50,000 people lived in the city of Uruk in early 4th and 3rd millennium BC. The city of Uruk was inhabited over a period of about 5,000 years, let's say 5th millennium BC to 3rd century AD. Uruk, known in the Bible as Erech, was for a long time the religious center of the Sumerians, and the myth we pay attention to are all originated from there. We see here a development of the cuneiform I will not go into because we are running out of time otherwise, but you can look at it a little bit later on, maybe, if you are interested in. To show the dimensions that made up this city, we have a look at the picture that shows us what the Inanna temple district might have looked like in the early 3rd millennium BC. On the highest point of the ziggurat, just to explain, a ziggurat is a temple tower of the ancient Mesopotamia having the form of a terraced pyramid. So on the highest point of the ziggurat here in white, the annual sacred marriage rite took place. The sacred marriage was the annual conjunction between the priestess, who was seen as the incarnation of goddess Inanna, and the king. This annual ritual was one of the most important celebrations in Uruk. The conjunction between goddess and king guaranteed welfare and rich harvests for the city and its people. The word conjunctions come from the Latin word conjunctio and means, in psychological sense, the secret of the union of opposites. It describes a process of uniting what is separated or different. Primarily, we speak here about the masculine and feminine principles. Psychologically, this symbolical ritual manifests an inner soul transformation and so the possibility of the creation of a new quality of life. It also represents, psychologically expressed, a reciprocal and creative relationship between the unconscious and the unconsciousness. It is to mention that C.G. Jung sees the conjunction as an archetypal act that can be positively or also negatively polarized. Back to Uruk, it is supposed, on the basis of hints and prayers, that the whole population of Uruk seemed to have been united near the temple to witness the sacred ritual we can imagine that a feeling of connectedness arose, which was nourishing for everyone's soul. This is expressed in following hymn, from which I quote a few lines. The hymn is called "The Joy of Sumer, the Sacred Marriage." The people of Sumer assemble in the palace, the house which guides the land. The king builds a throne for her queen of the palace. He sits beside her on the throne in order to care for her life, of the life for all the lands. The exact first day of the month is closely examined, and on the day of the disappearance of the moon, on the day of the sleeping of the moon, the me are perfectly carried out. What a wonderful tribute to love. The union between goddess and king was seen as a religious, spiritual act and was to serve fertility, rich harvest, and well-being for the land and the people. Jung's concept of Eros is represented here in a way that is very touching to me. It is important to always remember the psychological or symbolical meaning when using the term Eros. Eros means much more than sexuality, as we see in the example of the sacred marriage. In Jungian psychology, it is a symbolical term that means the area of one's relationship to his soul. It also means relatedness, connection, and love. We remember that Jung considers logos to be a masculine principle that also lives in women. We call it animus, while Eros is a feminine principle that also lives in men. We call it anima. Jung mentions about the quality of logos and Eros. The concept of Eros could be expressed in modern terms as psychic relatedness, and that of logos as objective interest. And it is the function of Eros to unite what logos has sundered. It seems that the Sumerians were inspired to bring together or even unite masculine and feminine power and competences in a complementary way. This on many levels. These were, of course, optimal conditions to produce cultural achievements and thus prosperity for the whole land. We are now moving into the time frame of early 3rd millennium BC, the time in which important changes took place, which affected the collective consciousness in whole Mesopotamia. I refer to the German book Sumerer and Akkader from Gebhard Seltz, a professor of ancient Near Eastern studies. This time might be interesting for us, as we eventually can shed more light on the miracle of the process of consciousness. It was the time of King Sargon I, who was ruling the country of Akkad, whose people had Semitic roots. It is believed that the Akkadians had adopted parts of culture and religion and the writing of the Sumerians even before they took over Sumer. King Sargon conquered about 2350 BC all city-states of Sumer. His dynasty lasted more than 150 years, which was a long time in these warlike times. Besides the fact that King Sargon was apparently a handsome man, he was a very successful ruler and king, to whom many legends were dedicated. Sargon I was subject of a birth legend that the biblical Moses was inspired by. This in Exodus 2, phrases 1 to 10. The legend says that Sargon, like Moses, lay abandoned in a wicker basket on the river Euphrates. As an outcast son, he was saved by Inanna, or the Akkadian Ishtar, who raised him and chose him as king later on. Like Moses, he got law codes from a higher power. Significant for our considerations are the descriptions of King Sargon. It was the first time in Sumerian history that the king was described as a king with his own individual abilities and competencies, and was not only guided by the pantheon. Pantheon is a sanctuary dedicated of the gods, so to speak, the home of the gods. Literature describes him with a personality of his own and as a powerful and capable king. It was the first time that literature was describing a king by his own personality. King Sargon established through the power of his own personality a central state, reunited North and South Mesopotamia, and showed during his kingship responsibility for the first written collection of laws in history. This long before of the famous Codex Hammurabi from the 18th century BCE. The laws described rights and duties for individuals. So to speak, the first written civil law was born. Also, family rights were established, like inheritance, rights and responsibility for children, that poorest people often sold them as slaves before, and also punishment for cheating, as well as duties and rights in marriage or divorce. Civil rights and obligations toward social togetherness were changing the social order. We don't know exactly how families were organized before the establishment of the civil law of King Sargon. For a change of pace, let's take a look at two proverbs that seem to describe minor concerns from the daily life of Sumerian husbands that, so it seems, became not easier due to the newly developing social order. So one laments, "My wife is in the outdoor shrine. My mother is down the river, probably attending a religious rite. And here am I starving of hunger." It seems that daily religious rites were in the hands of Sumerian women, and that practicing them seemed to be very important, even more than cooking and caring for the husband. That Sumerian man at times regretted his marriage seems to be evident from the saying, "For his pleasure, marriage, on his thinking it over, divorce." Somehow, this sounds familiar to us, doesn't it? It seems it hasn't changed so much since thousands of years. From the writings, it can be seen that family life and loyalty were given great importance. King Sargon I organized social life that demanded obligation to fellow men, and he promoted and supported the religious life of the Sumerians through his daughter Enheduanna, since she was likely appointed by her father to cement ties between the Akkadian religion of her father and the native Sumerian religion. Enheduanna was the high priestess of moon god Nana, who is also mentioned as father of Inanna. Enheduanna is regarded by literary and historical scholars as possibly the earliest known author and poet in the world. Her poems, especially those dedicated to goddess Inanna, are touching and heart-filling. Yet, she is almost entirely unknown in the modern day, and her achievements have been largely overlooked. A notable exception is the work of Jungian analyst Betty Deschamps-Meder. I really recommend you to read this book. These ancient written records might show that Sargon, as a conqueror and author of laws, had a close relationship to the feminine principle, or with C.G. Jung words, Eros was integrated in his life, which is expressed in the wise action that he supported the religious life of the Sumerians, which was also characterized by a strong worship of goddess Inanna. Let us now look at the process of consciousness that took place during the reign of this king that unfolded a new way of thinking. From a psychological point of view, people began to free themselves from an identification with the unconscious mind, from an identification with the world of gods. Jung quotes about the identification or unconscious identity in modern times. Unconscious identity is a well-known psychological phenomenon. For example, identification with persons, things, functions, roles, positions, creeds, or gods, for example, which is only a shade more characteristic of the primitive or archaic than of the civilized mind. Identity or identification with other people is responsible for the naive assumption that the psychology of one man is like that of another, that the same motives occur everywhere, that what is agreeable to me must obviously be pleasurable for others, that what I find immoral must also be immoral for them, and so on. It's a great issue in today's difficult times, for example, in accepting different opinions in politics, or now about to be vaccinated or not. Let's go back to the Sargon's reign, when a quality of time was observed that represents an important step in the development of human consciousness, as people recovered slowly but steadily their own identity and began to differentiate themselves from the world of the gods. That does not mean that the gods became less important, but psychologically we could say that a new, more individual consciousness began to unfold, which fits well into C.G. Jung's definition of consciousness. By consciousness, I understand the relation of psychic contents to the ego, insofar as this relation is perceived as such by the ego. We could assume that the unification of the Akkadian and Sumerian cultures could have been very fruitful for the rising up of a new consciousness. Sargon, the man of law and order, accepted and promoted Sumerians' religious attitude with help of his daughter Enheduanna. The Sumerian religion, especially in Uruk, was strongly influenced by the love for the goddess Inanna, which means that the feminine principle was of great importance in the spiritual realm. This could also explain the creative power that brought forth this high culture throughout Mesopotamia. Where has the creative power gone in our society? As follows a statement of Marie-Louise von Franz. The feminine, Eros only, the principle of the culture of mind and feeling, seems to degenerate and care only about prestige and power. Our situation today, feminine and masculine are separated and out of relation. In our still patriarchal world, it is not easy for a woman to develop a feminine spirit that corresponds to her own nature. How difficult it must be for a man. In the search for an independent feminine spirit, we need perspectives, visions, concepts to be able to even consider a necessary rethinking in today's time. In today's world, we have to realize that we are no longer getting anywhere by suppressing the feminine vitality and one-sided thinking that is committed to the rational. We need new values and ways of thinking that we can link to our cultural understanding and reconcile with our social value system. I think this is very important. The Sumerian literature and arts seem just predestined to give us ideas for a new thinking also, or because this area is known as the cradle of our civilization. So let us be inspired by a wonderful scene which shows us the awakening of consciousness at times of King Sargon I. This famous inscription is named Ada, cylinder seal. Ada seems to be the scribe or the owner of the seal, as we know from the inscription top left. Let's have a look how natural the vision for the Sumerian was that the rising up of consciousness was accompanied under the caring care of God and Goddess, feminine and masculine energies. In the middle below, we see sun god Utu with rays coming up from his shoulder. I will try to find the, I think this is, oh no, yeah. Oh, I will show it. This is sun god Utu with rays that are coming up from his shoulder. These rays might symbolize the rising sun, so to speak, an uprising consciousness. He holds his attribute a serrated blade or saw, and is just, this blade or saw, and is just beginning to emerge from between two square-topped mountains, here and here. On his left side, we see his sister, goddess Inanna, with the holy hulupu tree. Means the tree of life, that we will meet again later on. She holds a date branch over the head of her brother. And a date branch, one of her attributes for fertility. It seems like she blesses her brother's ritual. On the right side, we see Enki, god of wisdom and god of the Apsu. Apsu was the place where underground fresh water was contained. Enki's Apsu was often mentioned as the womb of a mother, in that the embryo swims like a fish in the water. I like this picture. Symbolically seen, we could say that the god of wisdom was seen as a caretaker or guardian of unfolding consciousness. Here, Enki is represented with the rivers Euphrates and Tigris, the rivers, which spring from his shoulders and are full of life and food, represented in the fishes and the animals around him. The fishes, the animals around him. To the right and left of the great deities, we see attendant gods here, which we will not go into here. All deities wear the multiple horned crown, which shows that they are major gods. All three deities, Enki as the father of his children Inanna and Utu, are involved in the process of consciousness in Sumerian mythology again and again, and are closely committed to it. This cylinder seal may express how much the creative growing and becoming of consciousness was perceived by the Sumerian people as a divine event in which the masculine and feminine principles are both involved. It seems that this attitude was firmly anchored in the religious worldview of the Sumerians. This loving and spiritual attitude to the divine and religious experience with the divine brings freedom and pistis, as Jung mentions. I have to, oh my God. I'm sorry, I have to look at something. Okay. Okay, C.G. Jung quotes about the religious experience. I'm sorry for this. The religion is not a question of belief, but of experience. A religious experience is absolute. It cannot be disputed, no matter what the world thinks about a religious experience. The one who has it possesses a great treasure, a thing that has become for him a source of life, meaning and beauty, and that has given a new splendor to the world and mankind. He has pistis and peace. The humble service to a divine power makes life meaningful for men, and this seems to be necessary to bring or evoke healing processes for everyone's soul. We have seen King Sargon as a powerful but also ensouled man. He was also committed to religious or spiritual life as he was to the material prosperity and orderly cohabitation of his people. Once again, we meet masculine and feminine power complementing and empowering each other, and not in competition with each other. One example among many others in Western society that shows how people are affected by not only suppressing a devotional, spiritual attitude, but also by denying old age knowledge, can be found in a conversation between C.G. Jung and the Pueblo Indian mountain lakes. You find this conversation in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, page 247. See, Mountain Lake said to C.G. Jung, how cruel the whites look. Their lips are thin, their noses sharp, their faces furrowed and distorted by folds. Their eyes have a staring expression. They are always seeking something. What are they seeking? And he stated at the end, we think they are mad because they think with their heads. When Jung asked where Indian people are thinking, he said, we are thinking here, showing his heart. In this respect, let's have a look how thinking was described for Sumerian people. I refer to a wonderful book which describes aspects of the human being in old Mesopotamia. It is written by Ulrike Steiner, a professor for ancient Oriental studies. In the Sumerian, understanding, wisdom, and knowledge were received by the ears and also by the eyes, but were kept inside. For that existed the experience Sadal Karsi. I mention Sumerian terms here because I like them, and it is a hint how far this language is from all languages we know. Interesting in this context to the term Sadal Karsi seems to me that for Sumerians it is the heart that remembers. This is the term Hasazu in Sumerian language, Hasazu. And that one only can know things in connection or in touch with his heart. This was the term Ina Libi Idu. Advice from fellow human beings falls into the heart of the person and is kept there. This could remind us of a proverb we often use when we say we take something to heart. The holistic thinking was also expressed in the language, since heart and self are equally capable of planning evil and making wrong decisions. Such things and more we know thanks to the large numbers of Sumerian clay tablets, thanks to which we can gain valuable insights into religion, ethics, philosophy of the Sumerian people. Only in 1893 to 1895, one of the largest finds were excavated in Nippur, an ancient Sumerian site, which is about 100 miles away from modern Baghdad. Several thousand tablets and fragments with Sumerian compositions have been excavated on the so-called Tablet Hill. These findings were startling and revealing. We see here a picture of an archaeological excavation of clay tablets. We see how small these tablets are. In average, about 5 to 7 centimeters or 1.9 inch to 2.75 inch. Cylinder seals could be even smaller. The other seal, for example, was in height about 3.9 centimeters or 1.5 inches in diameter, 1.1 inch in diameter. One can imagine how skillful these people were. Through this excavation, one found out that in Sumer, a good millennium before the Hebrews wrote down their Bible, and the Greeks their Iliad and Odyssey, we find a rich and major literature consisting of myth, epic tales, hymns, lamentations, and numerous collections of proverbs, fables, and essays. The translations, which took many, many years to complete because the Sumerian language was completely unknown, were a sensation. Many of the Sumerian myths agree in essence with biblical legends. Probably the most famous discovery was the translation of a Sumerian text from the Epic of Gilgamesh, which tells the story of the flood. We see here the flood tablet, which is on display in the British Museum, London. This object is the single most famous cuneiform text and caused a sensation when its content was first read in the 19th century because of its similarity to the flood story in the book of Genesis. This is the curator's comment of the British Museum. When I was looking for the flood tablet in the British Museum, it was very impressive to me how people gathered around this tablet. I had to queue quite a bit till I could get near to it, and I did not see anyone who was not touched by this artifact of ancient times. Let's have a very, very small extract from the tablet 11 of the Gilgamesh epic. Utanapishtim, the Sumerian Noah, mentioned in Sumerian mythology as the wisest of the wise, teaches King Gilgamesh, who was in search for eternal life, that he is to protect and guide his people entrusted to his care and bring back religious life to his town. Utanapishtim was the man who was instructed by Enki, the god of wisdom, to build an ark to be saved from the flood. We remember, like Noah was instructed by Yahweh. When Gilgamesh met the wise Utanapishtim after a long, exhausting, and difficult journey, he did not receive the eternal life he was searching for, but he got instructions from Utanapishtim. Gilgamesh shall rebuild the temples and sanctuaries destroyed by the flood and bring back religious life to his people so that, as before the flood, the happy, heartful fabric of give and take between gods and people can once again permanently unite them. Only in the fulfillment of these royal tasks, he would find salvation and meaning in life. By following these instructions, it is said that Gilgamesh reunited God and man. He re-established a fruitful religious life in Uruk, which might have formed a basis for the high culture in this land. Gilgamesh became recipient and mediator of the deep wisdom or the everlasting truth that cannot be seen in physical immortality on this earth, but in the deep connection to the divine, or psychologically expressed, the deep connection to our souls or to ourselves. It is the deep knowledge that Jung describes in his way. It is certainly not a knowledge that could be connected with the ego, and hence not a conscious knowledge as we know it, but rather a self-subsistent unconscious knowledge, which I would prefer to call absolute knowledge. In today's world, we need to recognize our honor. In today's world, we need to recognize or honor an absolute knowledge, as Jung calls it. It needs a certain humble attitude towards a higher power, which could have to be thought in a very personal spirituality or in a religious attitude. Gilgamesh was to bring a new religious attitude or the divine to his people. This made him immortal because in the hearts of the people, he lives on until today. Let's briefly try to go into more detail about the symbolical meaning of the ark. In Old Hebrew language, ark was also expressed in the word teva, T-E-W-A. The terms of Old Hebrew language I took from the book In Diesseits und Jenseits. Maybe the translation is in this world, in reality, and the beyond, from Friedrich Weinreb. He is the author of Roots of the Bible, to give you an English title. Weinreb was a great Kabbalist. He lived from 1910 to 1988. With his books, he is offering a key to experience the Bible in our daily life. So the word Teva also has the meaning of small container or small box, which also refers to the wicker basket in which Moses was abandoned on the river, and also refers to the Ark of Covenant in which the 10 laws given to Moses were stored. Teva in the Hebrew numerical script had the meaning of Lashon, L-A-S-H-O-N, Lashon, what means language. Let us imagine what this Hebrew numerical script opens for us here. The ark symbolizes more than a life-saving container for living beings. It is a lifesaver of the divine word, which tries to find expression for the deep knowledge, or we also could say for the absolute knowledge, as Jung mentions. The old Hebrews knew that it is the divine word that carries our life throughout the time, and they knew that without the connection to the divine word, we would drown. We know that the old biblical texts written in ancient Hebrew have been translated and interpreted many times, also from people who were beholden to the ecclesiastical institutions and therefore were interested in oppressing people with laws and fear of God's punishment that served to maintain their power. Thus, many biblical legends, including the story of Noah's Ark, lost the divine power for a lot of people. I think because statements on archetypal forces have been weakened at the expense of power claim. So let's go back to the Sumerian Ark of Uttanapishti. The name Uttanapishti also means I have found my life. Symbolically, we could say maybe I have found a connection to my soul, which means to my inner life, psychologically, to myself. That we could say we have found meaning in our life. In Sumerian language, we find the term umamu. It was a poetic word for human beings as well as for animals, which expressed that both were considered equal. Prayers often mentioned humans and animals parallel with each other. So we can say that the arc of the Sumerian helped sustain life by embracing it in its wholeness, containing instincts, feelings, and emotions, as well as the power of the word. In the Sumerian arc, every life experience was seen as equal and not only worthy to survive, but also seen as worth to learning and experiencing from each other, be it animal or human, being instinctive life or human reason. The arc time seems to be a time to experience and honor all life expression, as all were seen as a gift from their gods. Psychologically, we could say that we all are supposed to be an arc in honoring and finding words for all life expressions living within us. Isn't it what we try to experience during analysis? So we can assume that the archaic understanding of the Sumerians of the arc could have been basis for the Hebrews, who already possessed a much more differentiated consciousness to verbalize deep soul experiences. They knew that deep soul experiences can only come up in a protected and sheltered environment, like it is symbolically expressed by the arc. The Hebrews knew how to put profound soul processes into divine words. The ark was a symbol for that, was a symbol that showed the necessity of containing divine or archaic soul processes and finding worth for them. The ark also was meant as a container to carry on this eternal truth as long as humankind exists. It seems that man is tied to the challenging and often exhausting tasks of experiencing all inherent life expressions, and he is supposed to find words for all of them, so to speak, to get conscious about it. C.G. Jung speaks of sumptuous experiences that are necessary to find its life. They, the inaccessible experiences, really consist in the fact that they cost us an enormous amount of effort. They demand the very thing we most fear, namely the wholeness, which we talk about so glibly and which lend itself to endless theorizing, though in actual life we give it the widest possible berth. Samuel Noah Kramer writes about the Sumerians that they always were searching for the origin of all being and the divine truth. Their religious attitude resembled the search for inner truth that were expressed by the me, the Sumerian myth, which were religious texts, were characterized by a holistic view of the world. God and evil were considered to be contained in men. A Sumerian proverb, early 2nd millennium BC, was, A child without transgression has never been born from his mother. Such a thing has not yet been proclaimed, that someone among the people is without fault. There has never been such a thing. It was clear as day that there were no perfect people. The Sumerians believed that all good and evil came from the gods, for it was them to create, for it was them who created mankind. The religious charisma and the wholeness of goddess Inanna on the life of people was immense, as can be seen from mythology. She embodied the power of relationship that makes it possible to have a soulful relatedness, not only to human beings, but to all beings, to ourselves and all we do and experience in daily life, be it in a constructive, creative, or also in a destructive way. Goddess Inanna served the highest creative power, a divine potency for which the Sumerian created the word me. The word stood for the highest divine world order, the divine order principles and forces which held the cosmos and the real world constantly in motion. We might also say that the me were describing the nature's laws to which the psyche also belongs. So we can understand that the me also symbolically can be seen as manifestations of inner truth or psychological the self. They contained in themselves all opposites which were most vividly represented in Sumerian mythology. Inanna's work was under the task to realize the me. In this context, we will have a look to the myth Inanna and the god of wisdom, and we will embark again, this time, into the boat of heaven, in which the young goddess was sailing to her father, the god of wisdom, Enki. This clay table is from 3000 BC, and we see goddess Inanna in her boat of heaven. She is on the way to Uruk. With the me, she wrangled out of Enki. Let us have a very short summary of this myth, which should show how knowledge and knowing, seen in Logos, needs feminine power to become experienced and integrated in life. As a young woman, Inanna lay naked on an apple tree, rejoicing at her female beauty. She is representing in her most fertile way, rejoicing at her wondrous vulva. It is her intention to visit her father, Enki, the god of wisdom, who was in charge with the me, the divine powers. She was invited to dinner with him. A lot of stories tell that in the Sumerian pantheon, there was a lively social life, and often gods and goddesses invited each other for extensive meals and drinks. So we could symbolically understand that the pantheon of Sumer was also understood as a nourishing community who also knew how to enjoy life. We see here a cylinder seal of 2500 BC on display at the British Museum. It is called the Banquet. Inanna's journey to Enki can be understood as a wish to be fertilized and nourished by her fatherly spirit. With the magical, spiritual, and cultural powers of life. The desire of Inanna was to bring divine knowledge and wisdom, symbolized by the me, to Uruk, her town, her king, and her people. As soon as she arrived with her boat of heavens, she was welcomed in the holy shrine of her father, Enki, and they began to eat butter cake and to drink beer. Young Inanna, quite smart, not to say shifty, offers her father more and more beer. Enki, the overconfident host, gets drunk after a while and is full of generosity. And Inanna, of course, full of intention. Enki donates and Inanna takes. So says the myth. Enki raised his cup and toasted Inanna. In the name of my power, in the name of my holy shrine, to my daughter Inanna, I shall give the divine powers. 14 times Enki raised his cup, and 14 times he offered his daughter 5 me, 6 me, 7 me. 14 times Inanna accepted the sacred me by simply saying, I take them. I love this passage. Inanna, eager to gain knowledge, culture, and insight, stands before her drunken father and naturally accepts every me he offered to her. What a difference to poor Eve, who had to be seduced by the serpent in order to learn about spiritual and cultural powers of life and to gain consciousness, being able to differentiate between good and evil. She and all mankind have to bear the original sin as a punishment for her wish to be an ark for the divine word. But young Inanna and her people were not punished for the flare-up of the spark that urges to gain consciousness. For the Sumerians, there was no sin, or even original sin, that was attributed to the female desire to become wise, as we know from the Christian theology. J. Botero, who studied the Sumerian understanding of guilt, responds as follows. The Sumerian understanding of guilt, man's inclination to evil and the suffering coupled with it in the Old Testament, goes back to this man's own fault and not, like the Sumerian thinking, by the will of their creator as a result of the condition in which they were brought for. So it was the will of God that men were to realize the me psychologically, to accept their destiny and experience the divine powers that contain all opposites in itself. Inanna was to bring the divine powers, the me, to meet mankind. Enki was holding the me in his shrine, far away from life and from people. But as a god who felt kindly towards humans, he was committing them to his daughter, who he knew would bring them to realization. Psychologically, we could say that knowing or knowledge need feminine power or feeling and emotions to bring it to life and reality. Think on our work as analyst. The knowledge about Jungian psychology we gained during our studies must be born by a truthful and empathic relationship to our clients. Logos and feminine principle have to interact to touch the client and initiate inner processes. The big question is, how can the feminine be increasingly recognized and integrated again in today's consciousness and life? During a discussion with a priest friend, I was trying to express that spiritual nourishment should be, besides proclaiming and sharing God's word above all, to reach the hearts of the people. We were discussing about this cylinder seal, that he was very touched of it. This Contemplation of the hulupu tree was helpful to recognize that feminine and masculine qualities are living in both men and women. That sealing the seal is dated from about 2300 BC, the time of the regency of King Sargon we already met. The seal is most likely related to the Sumerian myth, the hulupu tree. In this creation myth, heaven and earth have been separated by the patriarchal gods An and Enlil under a heavy thunderstorm. It describes how fearful this for the young goddess Inanna must have been, and how she saves herself by retreating to her own sacred garden to prepare for her tasks shown in the holy hulupu tree. At that time, a single tree, a hulupu tree, was planted by the banks of the Euphrates. The whirling south wind arose, pulling at its roots and ripping at its branches. A woman who walked in fear of the word of the sky god An, who walked in fear of the word of the air god Enlil, plucked the tree from the river and spoke, I shall bring this tree to Uruk. I shall plant this tree in my holy garden. After years and years of careful care and nurturing the tree grew up and became big and strong. But then, when she was about to get a throne and bed from her tree, a great tragedy happened for the young goddess because dark spirits took possession of the tree. The serpent, who could not be charmed, made its nest in the roots of the hulupu tree. The Ansu bird set his young in the branches of the tree, and the dark lily, who be the shadow of Inanna, built her home in the trunk. The young woman who loved to laugh wept. How Inanna wept! Yet they would not leave her tree. After carrying a new growing spirit of life shown in the hulupu tree, in the protected holy realm of her garden, young Inanna was completely overwhelmed. Don't we often feel the same way when we are confronted with new insights that are not so easy to realize in our lives? It is difficult to withstand all the destructive thoughts that arise and try to keep us away from adopting a new attitude. Young Inanna could not dispel the dark spirits from her tree by her own power, and so she sought help from sky god An, which represented a powerful father spirit, and from her brother sun god Utu, we already have met. Both refused to stand by her. Psychologically, we can say that this was fortunate for her. How do we come up to this? If we look at the most powerful sky god An, we encounter a patriarchal spirit. He represents authority and power. Her brother Utu stands for the masculine consciousness, which stands for the earthly laws. Okay. Utu was considered the god of truth, justice, and the protector of earthly laws. Neither authoritarian power nor an overly clear consciousness dominated by rules and dogmas would help Inanna in this situation. What she needed in this hopeless situation was a sacred ritual or a religious experience, as was mentioned before by a quote of Jung. The experience in the acting or drive of her brother Gilgamesh would help her to find her destiny, which was represented in bed and throne. So desperate she was, she turned to her brother-in-law Gilgamesh, with whom she would be responsible for the welfare of the city of Uruk in the future. Let's visit that wonderful scene. Gilgamesh, the valiant warrior Gilgamesh, the hero of Uruk, stood by Inanna. Gilgamesh fastened his armor of 50 minas around his chest. The 50 minas weighed as little to him as 50 feathers. He lifted his bronze axe, the axe of the road, weighing 7 talents and 7 minas to his shoulder. He entered Inanna's holy garden. Let's psychologically say, a strong, loving brother spirit, seen in animus, entered her holy garden to help her. Gilgamesh struck the serpent, who would not be charmed. The Ansu bird flew with his young to the mountains, and Lilith smashed her home and fled to the wild, uninhabited places. Gilgamesh then loosened the roots of the holapa tree, and the sons of the city who accompanied him cut off the branches. From the trunk of the tree, he carved a throne for his holy sister. From the trunk of the tree, Gilgamesh carved a bed for Inanna. From the roots of the tree, she fashioned a puku for her brother. From the crown of the tree, Inanna fashioned a miku for Gilgamesh, the hero of Uruk. We do not know even now what puku and miku means. The present Inanna was given to Gilgamesh. Symbolically seen, Gilgamesh and Inanna prepared each other with the cultural act of cutting the tree and carving and fashioning throne and bed to fulfill their destiny. They helped each other to realize what task they would have to fulfill. They would be responsible for fertility and growth, for land and people, on the physical as well as on the spiritual level. The cylinder seal is displayed also at the British Museum, London. This throne is considered, besides the representation of a secular power, in various representations as the seat of a religious attitude. In Sufism, the throne of God has its seats in the heart of the mystic. In Buddhism, one speaks that the throne corresponds to the tantric lotus of the heart. If we took a look at the Old Testament, we see that the throne appears as a symbol of God's judicial power. Here, it seems the patriarchal spirit has already taken over. Also, the throne dedicated to the goddess shows once more that the feminine with vitality and power played a leading role in the religious and spiritual life of the Sumerians. As we see in the picture, both king and goddess are sitting on a throne of the same size and shape. Power and duties are equally shared. The throne dedicated to the king showed his leading role for the worldly affairs. But most important was that the king's religious attitude and his devotion to the goddess was absolutely essential for the well-being, fertility, and knowledge, as well as the rich harvests for his people. As we learned, he was told by Uttanapishti to do so. The king was enthralled and spirited by a strong, vital, and loving feminine power that was represented by the goddess. Psychologically said, the giving and taking between feminine and masculine powers, or between conscious and unconsciousness, brings forth creative powers, as we can observe with the Sumerians. In this beautifully depicted scene, we can witness the complementary aspect of masculine and feminine powers we pondered about. It is very interesting to observe that 4 branches, a female number that represents wholeness and also quality of earth, extend into King Gilgamesh's realm, and 3 branches, a dynamic number, assigned to the masculine principle, extend to the goddess realm. They mutually recognize and fertilize each other in fondness to each other, but still remain with themselves in their own realm. Psychologically, we could say that they can stay completely with themselves in their psychologically, we could say that they can stay completely with themselves. We also could say that this attitude can unfold own talents and creativity, which correspond to our nature given to us. The growth and or expansion of consciousness requires the participation of manifold aspects, which we cannot all consider here. We focused on possibilities, how masculine and feminine qualities and skills could be nurtured from each other in everyday life. The representation of goddess and king on the cylinder seal of the hula tree also shows us how important the appreciation of one's own being is, being feminine or masculine, and that one has to care for his own teminus, seen as an individual protected realm, like the symbolical meaning of the ark or the holy garden of Inanna showed it to us. I maybe repeat this because the pronunciation was not very good. It's very important. So this picture shows us how important the appreciation of one's own being is, being feminine or masculine, and that one has to care for his own teminus, seen as an individual protected realm, like the symbolic meaning of the ark or the holy garden of Inanna showed it to us. Creating space for our own being allows us to unfold a spirituality corresponding to our own being. Today's situation calls for a rediscovery of inner values that are hidden within ourselves and can only be discovered in the appreciation of our own being. That things can change. Men and women are both called to live in profound communion and not in concurrence to each other. A reciprocal recognition of one another, a respectful attention to the other being is necessary. This will only be possible if a loving, respectful attitude towards one's own person can be cultivated. Let us begin to unfold Logos and Eros equally in our daily work, in trying to find our own spiritual life that can nourish our hearts to be able to work together for the common good through the power of the complementary aspects of masculine and feminine principles. This requires a deep self-knowledge, which can be achieved by a courageously confronting with one's own inner truth, always with respect and love towards oneself. Like C.J. Jung says, one Only what is really oneself has the power to heal. Or what in Sumerian religious attitude was already contained. If man shows himself respect, we will be given a God. Thank you so much for your attention. Looking forward to our exchange or to answering questions. And I hope that my English will be good enough to satisfy your interest and answering your questions for and about the divine texts of Sumerian mythology.
Thank you so much. My goodness. I'm really glad you let us record this because there is a lot to learn in there.
Yeah, I know.
I think I'm going to want to watch it again. I took a lot of notes. So please use the raise hand function. And if you do, I will send you an unmute request and you will be able to unmute yourself. You know, it always takes a while for the first question to show up. But I have faith. There it is. Mitra.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for a very interesting lecture. I missed the part about the Lashon. You said something about Lashon. That's my first question, but I have some other more important questions. What was the part about Lashon that you said it was language, which of course is also a Hebrew name? I missed that part. Would you mind refreshing my memory of what was the connection between Lashon and the Sumerian myth?
Lashon, I don't understand what you mean. You mean?
You use the word Lashon.
You said it was a Hebrew word,
yes,
a Hebrew
yes,
word
yes.
for language.
Yes, it means the language. Lashon is an old Hebrew term for language.
And in what context were you using it? How did it relate to the Sumerian myth?
It was connected to the Sumerian myth of the ark. I tried to explain that the symbolical meaning of the ark in Hebrew times, and as the Hebrews were taking over, I think the myth of the Sumerian ark in Gilgamesh epic. That's the connection.
Okay, can I go on if there is nobody asking anything yet?
Well, there's another person, but go ahead if you just don't, you know, not too
Yes.
long, but we'll give you a little more time.
Okay, real well. I was wondering, do you think that perhaps it's not such a good idea when we compare the mystical aspects of certain religions? For example, Sufism is the mystical aspect of Islam, and of course we have the mystical aspect in all religions. But if we take the mystical aspect of Sufism and others that are a lot more egalitarian and complementary towards the feminine, and then we try to compare that to patriarchal aspects of other religions like Judaism or even Islam and Christianity itself, I think, don't you think that's kind of a very unfair comparison? That perhaps what we need to do is compare the Kabbalah, which is the mystical aspect of Judaism, or the ideas of the Christian mystics, to these other mystical traditions. I think this is something I notice a lot of the times happens when people are pointing out the relationship between masculine and feminine in different religions, traditions, mythologies. And I noticed that you were making the same kind of comparison, the patriarchal versus the mystical, the patriarchal in Christianity and Judaism versus the mystical in Sufism. And I just wanted to understand if you see that that's not a proper comparison, that
Yes,
Are
of
you
course.
familiar with the Kabbalah? Kabbalah has an extremely important position for the feminine. So yeah, that was a thing. I was wondering if you would be kind enough to mention if you know anything about the concept of the feminine in the Kabbalah.
Yeah, I'm not an expert in that. I'm just dealing with the Sumerians I'm trying to explain it because of her archaic thinking that is contained in our souls. But of course, there are a lot of religions, or most of religions, that are that the feminine principle is contained. There's no question. But on our Christian theology, we miss it.
Yeah, exactly. It's because that aspect of Christianity and Judaism and Islam and all of the other ones,
Yes, of course,
they have fallen away from the mystical. One last thing, and then I'll let.
We do have a number, we have a number
Yes.
of people now with raised hands, so
Okay, I'll mention that afterwards. Go
I'll
ahead.
see if there's time, we'll come back to you.
Yes.
Elisa is next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. My question is about a hymn of Inanna that wasn't mentioned. It's the one where she is uniting with Dumuzi, and there's lots of sexual imagery in that hymn. There's a moment in that hymn where she says, I am your guide in battle. I will lead you in battle. And all of a sudden she's talking about being sort of either a military leader or something to do with protecting the people or being part of the army. And I thought that was really fascinating. She seems to be a goddess of both fertility and war. And when I think about nature, I certainly see in how nature works that there are elements of, all the beings in nature, there are elements of reproductive strategies, and there are elements of war strategies as well. So it makes sense to me that those two things would be together, but it's not the way it's generally seen today. We don't have goddesses of love and war. And I want to know, am I misinterpreting that? Am I making something up that's not in it? Or is that sort of the Sumerian attitude towards Inanna that's represented in that hymn?
I know what you mean, you mean, yes. Goddess Inanna was acting in her wholeness. She was a destructive and a creative goddess. I tried to show it up, but here I was concentrating on Eros, trying to show up the relationship between the king, who was acting in reality, and the goddess who was responsible, or who was nourishing people by spirituality. But of course, she also is a goddess of war. And it is interesting because Enheduanna, she wrote hymns for the king, describing how Inanna is protecting him during war times. He never would go into a war without the protection of Inanna. And often she is also mentioned as the mother of the king, who is protecting his child, his king. But of course, yes, that's the interesting thing, that Inanna is representing all the negative and the positive, the destructive and the creative sides of the world. Yes.
So that would be a valid interpretation. That
of course,
she's
yes.
Those aspects. Sure. Ah, wonderful.
One
Thank
side
you.
of the goddess. It's one side of the goddess, but there are many others.
Okay.
Okay, Virginia.
Thank you. Yes, Verena, I very much was fascinated by the idea of the serpents coiled in the roots of the hulupu tree. And in that last cylinder seal, which shows the tree that's freed from the serpents and the goddess and the king, the two
Yes.
serpents are sort of framing that seal. And
Yes.
I'm wondering whether that means they're driving away the serpents, or that the serpents are separated from the tree, or could it mean that the serpents become part of their power? In other words, their power over the serpents somehow. Kind of interesting.
Well, I think it's difficult to say, but I think it is the serpent is a very, very deep psychic power that is contained in that in that picture, or in that cylinder seal, but it doesn't seem that they were seduced by this serpent, but they accepted that the serpent is always there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like that. Mhm.
Okay, Gary Spake.
Hi, Verena. This is Gary. I really appreciate the way you brought the life out of these people. When you read Sitchin or some other people like that, you get facts, but you don't get any humanness in it. And it really showed up more maybe like the Egyptians did with their humanity. And, the question I had was, in a lot of the cylinder seals, you see these imagery around there, like a handbag that one's carrying, or a pine cone in the hand, or an ankh, or something like that. The imagery of what was called the ME, which was, I think, their showing of power, who was in control at the time. And Anna was getting these by getting Enki drunk and getting some more information, the MEs, I guess they call it. Do you have any idea what ME stands for?
What stands for? I didn't understand.
ME, the letters ME, which they used in Anna.
The me, yes. The mean are the divine powers of the gods.
Yeah, I always kind of took that it might have been like a hard drive, their information, the stuff that they knew that was secret information. And the only one that was in power was given that, because it was always trying to be stolen, that type of thing. And
Yeah.
So you see it in a lot of other cultures too. In the South American culture, they're carrying that little handbag, and you wonder, it must have been the same people over there too, just under different names,
A handbag to gather the me, or what do you mean?
It looks like a handbag. You see it in their hands, in the cylinder seals. You look at it all the time. The one that's in control always has this little handbag in the hand. It looks like a little loop with a little bag.
Okay, I didn't recognize.
I call it the handbag.
Okay.
Anyway, but that was the important thing. The ME, I didn't know what that stood for, but it's actually the perfect divine powers that they're given. It's the secret knowledge, probably, that person.
Yes.
And getting Enki drunk and convincing him to give her more powers. She got 14 of them eventually on that. And
she took all of them.
Yeah. And then another one, someone runs off with them, and they have to chase them in the rocket ship and get them back, and they kill the pilot of that. Very interesting stories to go on.
Yeah.
Trying to keep that ME private. Anyway, I just thought that was very interesting. He brought a real humanistic attitude about what they were like, as people.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Scheherazade.
Oh, hi, Verena. Thank you for such a deep and comprehensive presentation. There's a lot to chew on and learn. So you partially answered my question, the word me or me. So I think you related it to Jung's concept of absolute knowledge, right? Yes. So I have a question about the hulupu tree. And one poem I read a long time ago, and I think you read it now. It's It's the world tree, right? Inanna plants the first world tree. Is that right?
Inanna plants
The first world tree.
Oh, yeah. It is the world tree, but also her own destiny tree.
Oh,
you know, because she's a goddess. This is the archetypal world, and not a personal individual world. So
mhm.
this is a world tree. Yes, you're right. Yeah.
And it's
That-
also her destiny tree.
Yes.
To be
How
the
shall I
tree.
explain? In the archetypal world, this tree, it symbolically, a tree means also is a great symbol for getting conscious, because the branches are going to the heaven and the roots are in the earth, and all what is between is connecting these opposites, these big opposites. And it is also for them, it is also a tree, a symbol for getting conscious, or a symbol for individuation, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Are Sumerians those who called themselves the Blackheads?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Because
And we don't know where they are coming from. We have no idea.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I was wondering. And part of their actually civilization seeped into Iran, into where Elam is, ELAM.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
a major civilization, and just one last. Yeah, my question was about origin of Sumerians. They did the first writing, they did the first astrology, right?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you
Yes.
so much.
If you are interested to read the book of Samuel Noah Kramer,
Mhm, mhm.
it is really very interesting. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Really appreciate your work.
Now we have a question from our program officer who brings us all these wonderful speakers, Holly Fincher.
I didn't really have so much of a question, except I wanted to express my appreciation to Verena for her beautiful lecture.
Thank you.
Yeah, also, there's no way you could ever have known that in October 13th of 2001, Betty Metter herself had come when her book was first published. She came to visit the club in person and gave a lecture when we were still meeting at Chapman University. And this was my first introduction to Inanna and to the poems that are in her book.
Oh, how nice. She
Yeah.
was in Niklaus? No?
No, well, I don't know whether she ever had come to Zurich, but she was in Orange County in California to the club where you have just lectured.
Wow, great.
She had, I remember distinctly that she had shared with us how she came to do her work on Inanna was through a dream in which she saw in the distance these sort of large staff-like figures with a round shape at the top and a kind of a tail coming off, which of course she researched and understood as symbols of Inanna.
Oh, that's great.
It was so beautiful to both have your lecture and your deep going work into this material, and also to bring us sort of full circle back to think and remember Betty's work.
Great. Thank you, Holly. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly, for that. Yes. So I think we've actually gone over a little bit, but this is a very nice way to end. And I thank you again, Verena or Verena, which how you pronounce it. And Sumer and Sumer, different pronunciations.
Yeah, yeah. I tried to keep it, but Yeah.
I think it's fun to have diversity of pronunciation.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Thank you so much for an incredibly deep and so full of so much information. Really, really wonderful talk. So thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
And goodbye to everyone. And we hope to
Yeah.
see you at the January 30th lecture from Australia.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.